Hey, kids cook real food. Katie Kimball here for the Healthy Parenting Connector. And I am pleased to announce that we have a return interview guest, Noel Foy, who is an anxiety coach and neuroeducational consultant, is back because at the end of our last interview, I had all of these questions that just didn't fit. It just didn't fit. And I said, Noel, I think we need to do a second interview specifically on executive function because you have so much to share. So here she is. She's back. Welcome, Noelle.
Well, thank you so much, Katie. I'm so excited to be back, and I'm very, very grateful that you're actually going to talk more about this. I think it's a really important topic for teachers and parents and kids, and adults in general, coaches, anybody who spends time with kids.
Yeah, and we know executive function is really big with, our kids on the spectrum and with ADHD, like we kind of talked about last time, but also all human beings with brains. Let's just, be straight about that. So we'll jump in, but especially for folks who maybe didn't hear your first interview, PS, go back and listen to it. I'll do the official intro so people know who they're hearing from. Noelle is a mom, anxiety coach, neuroeducational consultant, and author of a couple children's books, Are You a Bird Like Me? And ABC Worry Free, which was a Mom's Choice Award recipient. She's a former classroom teacher, which, by the way, guys, anytime you hear someone has been in the classroom, like so much more weight to what this person says about children and parents and learning, because when you've been in the thick of it, you have experience like no one else. So let's not buzz through that little line. She's a former classroom teacher and a learning specialist who now specializes in workshops and one-on-one coaching for schools, families, and organizations on anxiety, stress management, executive function, and growth mindset. Her passion is to equip kids and adults with practical problem-solving tools to decrease stress, promote healthy change, and maximize each kid's unique potential. Welcome back, Noelle. Remind us your story, sort of how you shifted from the classroom to all the amazing things you do now.
Well, thank you for that kind introduction. It actually started from one of my sons having post-concussion syndrome. And he had multiple concussions, and I really wanted to learn more about the brain and how that was going to impact his learning and his life. And so I started learning a lot about executive function. And even as a former classroom teacher, honestly, most teachers don't get a lot of in-depth training with about executive function. So I started learning a lot about that and the impact that stress has on executive function, and not just physical stress, emotional stress. So that was when I made a shift. I just said, every teacher, parent, child needs to know about this. And as we'll find out from our discussion today, we'll learn more why.
Oh, yeah, definitely, definitely. So let's start with definitions. I'm big on making sure we have a common vocabulary. What is executive function? And let's talk about, kind of where that is physiologically in the brain, but also how that looks in real day-to-day life.
Yeah. So if you were to Google executive function, you're going to see a range of definitions. There isn't just one exact definitive definition that everybody agrees on, but here's what they do agree on. They are a self-directed set of producing skills, and they cue, they direct, they coordinate what we need to do and how we're going to do it and when we're going to do it. And so it includes a big set of skills to get things done. So anything from setting goals, planning how to approach something, prioritizing, getting started, remembering the directions, putting in the effort, sticking when it's hard, self-regulating our emotions, being flexible. Let's say things aren't going so well. How can we be flexible and try a different approach? And then how can we self-monitor what we're doing and kind of take a step back and see how is it going? How can we adapt? So that's just kind of the big picture definition and some of the skills that are included in executive function. And this might help some folks to imagine executive function if we were to picture a conductor and an orchestra of musicians. Think of the conductor as cueing and directing different groups of musicians to come in, to start playing, or to stop playing. And when they play in sync, every musician is doing their job and playing in the proper sequence and intensity at the correct time. And when this happens, they're working really efficiently and they're producing beautiful music versus just a bunch of random discordant sounds. So that's just one metaphor that can be helpful in understanding what is going on. And these reside in the prefrontal cortex, so this part of our brain, right over our forehead. They don't fully really develop until our 30s, especially for males. And I have four
30s.
sons.
Okay. Well, now wait, I've always read 25. Is the
Yeah.
research changing? Like the 30s, really? That's so late.
So closer to 30 for males. I'll tell you, the insurance companies knew a lot about executive function long before a lot of people, let's say in the classroom, because they knew that a lot of younger folks were more prone to accidents, right?
Uh-huh,
And
uh-huh.
more
Car
risks,
rentals, right?
right? Car rentals
Yeah.
and more risk taking. And so that's why that you couldn't used to rent a car till 25 or older. The research is showing that it's probably closer to 30 that this really fully develops. And while these skills reside in our prefrontal cortex, as I said, these need to sync and work well together. And since they're cognitive, social, and emotional, it is coordinating with different parts of our brain as well.
Okay. Wow. It's when you kind of list what executive functioning skills look like, it's really easy to see that it's age dependent, right? Like toddlers, preschoolers, early elementary kids, right? Like they don't have those skills yet. Very easy to see. But I do think it would surprise many people to learn that it's all the way until the 30s. This was not a planned question, but I'm just dying with curiosity. Are there ways to develop your executive functioning skills, I guess, better and faster? Because I have a 17-year-old boy. If I'm going to send him off into the world and expect him to do things like get married, choose a career, buy a house before his 30s, I'd like to have some sense of assurance that he can handle these things.
Yes, well, that's a fantastic question. And believe it or not, these skills start developing really when we're quite young.
Okay.
So, what we want to be mindful of is really providing great opportunities in the environment for these to develop. So, this can start very young with babies and toddlers. The playground can be a great place to build executive function. Think about how you have to take turns, how you may have to stop an activity and transition to another activity. That would be involving response inhibition, which is a hard executive function skill. Sometimes kids have trouble stopping. They want to keep going with something, right? You've probably seen that on the playground where it's time to go and the child wants to stay and continue playing.
I still
So
struggle
that,
with that.
right,
I never
that's a
want to go to
hard,
bed and end doing the fun things.
yes, so that's an example, but getting that practice on the playground is a great way to learn how to have some flexibility, some self-regulation, and to learn to work with others, take turns. And then I really believe it becomes something in school that we want it to live in the classroom. We want it to live in the home by providing, some good strategies and structure and some cueing of how to do things. Like maybe in your home, Katie, you have some visuals, cues of the morning routine. So visuals or some cues for what's the morning routine look like? What does the afternoon routine look like? What does the homework routine look like?
Mm.
That's a great way to start building executive function and help the kids with the how piece, not doing it for them, but helping them build those skills. Timers can be a great tool to use to help kids with deadlines and to get started and to develop a sense of time, because a lot of kids with weak executive function have a hard, they call it time blindness. They kind of have a hard understanding about the passage of time.
Shoot, I
And a
struggle with
lot,
that too.
that's probably one of my worst executive function skills is time management. I want to jam too much in a short period of time. So for kids that struggle with that, an analog clock is better than a digital because you get to see the passage of time. There's a lot of great timers out there that you can see, like it will fill in with a red color as the time moves, and kids get to see that. So anytime that you can see things visually, that helps kids with executive function. Um, and anytime we can help like reduce the cognitive overload, say your child has a lot of homework, if we could maybe just show one step at a time, or just really take it in chunks and make sure that they know the how. Sometimes I see kids being expected to start something, but they're not quite sure how, and then they can get stuck. And some kids with weak executive function can quickly start to unravel, and now we can start to see what looks like a behavior issue, but it could really be just some underdeveloped skills at play. And then being mindful of things like devices, other time robbers like missing items, kids not having what they need when they need to start their homework, missing their book or a pencil. Maybe they're hungry, maybe they're tired. All those things get in the way of time. So we
Okay.
can call those time robbers. So those are some things that can be helpful at home and in school to try to help build executive function. So it definitely is something, back to your initial question about your son, you build these skills over time.
Mm.
And with practice, just like anything else, Katie, just like going to the gym, I know you're in awesome shape. Um, it's the repetitions that really start to build the strength.
Okay, that makes sense. So even though perhaps the brain isn't fully formed until the 30s, I was imagining this as like a cup being full. And so the cup is getting bigger and bigger and bigger to be full of executive functioning skills until the 30s. But what we can do is make sure that whatever size cup our kids have is completely full, right? Is full of whatever they are able to handle at that time, I guess.
Providing them with opportunities. What I have
Okay.
seen at times, and I know this is all coming from a place of love and care and concern, sometimes I see adults stepping in a little too early and doing something for a child instead of maybe showing them a model or how.
Hmm.
And sometimes I feel we're stepping in a little too soon and doing the thinking for the kids. So we want to make sure we're giving those opportunities to build the skills. And building skills takes time, like you're an expert with baking. It doesn't just happen overnight. It takes some time. So having that patience with it is important. But having the opportunities and the practice are huge. If
Yes.
I am my child's prefrontal cortex and I'm always telling my child, okay, you need to do your homework now, you need to go get your pencil, you need to go get your book, get your backpack. Who's doing the thinking there? Me.
Hmm.
I can rephrase that and say, okay, we talked about homework time starting about now. When you see yourself doing your homework, what picture do you see in your mind? What will you need to bring? Where are you going to work? So you start to kind of break it down and ask questions and cueing the child instead of just telling them what to do.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, it's a simple shift. It's a simple shift, but it's hard to do because we tend to default to direction and we need to shift to question because questions is how they can do it themselves and they can learn. Yeah, I love that.
Yes. And we may think in the short term that, oh my gosh, it's such a busy night. If I start asking these questions, this is going to take longer. Let's just tell them what to do. That will be quicker. Every now and then you might have a night like that. But if you get
Mhm.
in a pattern of doing that every night, the child isn't really developing the skills themselves and doing the thinking.
Yeah, what I like about this is that I know our audience here at Kids Cook Real Food tend to be the kind of parents who really value life skills. They value independence. They value raising kids who know how to handle life and handle themselves. And who knew? Like basically that is teaching executive functioning skills. We just tend to call it teaching gardening, teaching emotional regulation, teaching life skills, but it's all this sort of same arena that we're playing in.
Absolutely. Like whether you're talking about a job, a pastime, sports, school, there's learning involved, right? And we need to be able to focus. We need to get stuff done in an efficient way, and we need to work well with others in the process. Those are all executive function skills. And you could even call executive function your highest level thinking, your critical
Yeah.
thinking skills. And when we think about it, Katie, if you were to Google any top skills employers seek, executive function skills are going to be on every list. they make up most of the list for most of the ones that I've seen out there. So, every employer is looking for somebody with good time management, good emotional intelligence, flexible thinking, especially during a pandemic. We had to be really flexible in our thinking. Somebody who's collaborative, and is a good problem solver, puts in great effort and shows resilience and is self-regulated. And so all those skills really come into play in a marriage, in parenting kids, in jobs, in any aspect of life.
For sure, for sure. Now, last time we talked a lot about anxiety and how anxiety can take over the brain. So let's connect that back. How does executive functioning work with anxiety and stress?
Yeah, great question. So, really important to be aware that when we get highly stressed or anxious, it can hijack our executive function temporarily. So, it will block our ability to pay attention, to remember what we learned. So, those kids that are in school that don't remember the directions, it is very possible they were in a stressed mindset thinking, oh my gosh, it's writing time, it's math time. I really don't know how to do this. This sounds really hard. That's what's filling their brain when the directions were being given. And then it's time to start. And that kid's like, what are we doing? So in that moment, that child's brain could have been hijacked. And, when we think about how we really have to problem solve in all aspects of life and make good decisions, those get hijacked as well. And this is really important to be aware of, that kids who do experience trauma or adverse childhood experiences, this can really impede the healthy development of executive function. Yes, so I think that's critical for folks to know. And then for kids who do have ADHD, or some other learning challenges, school can be a more stressful place. So this can put a bigger cognitive load and social or an emotional load on them, and that could more easily hijack their brain. So the thinking brain can get hijacked by the emotional brain when it's highly stressed. So these kids may present as uncooperative, unmotivated, and it could be actually the stress response just hijacked their brain. And it could be representing some underdeveloped skills that they have
Mm-hmm.
in
I feel
executive.
like for kids with ADHD, you just described a really vicious cycle because part of ADHD is a decrease in executive functioning. Am I correct on that?
So usually kids
Or
with ADHD are going to have weak executive
weak?
function.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then
And
you're saying if you have ADHD, you're more stressed in school, and the stress then hijacks the executive function they do have. Oh my goodness. Is there a simple way or a complex way to sort of interrupt that cycle?
yeah. So part of what we can do is help kids become aware of how the stress response works so
Okay.
they know what's going on in the brain, first of all, and then help them start to notice their warning signs.
Mm,
So if they start to notice worried thoughts, they can start to catch those, and then they can do something to help them reset, like for a movement break might be helpful,
mm,
a breathing technique might be helpful. Honestly, even learning how to reframe your thoughts, like if you can learn how to think about, let's say a child's afraid they're going to make a mistake. Maybe they think mistakes are all bad, right? And that could be enough to stress them. Maybe now we can think about mistakes as something that help me learn and grow, and it's actually going to make my brain stronger. Now I look at it differently, and I may keep my thinking brain in charge
mm.
because I've thought about it in a way that's not freaking my brain out. So yeah, we definitely need to teach kids some self-regulating strategies so they can keep their thinking brain in charge.
Yeah, and when you describe that, the language you use becomes really important. Just that idea of mistakes are bad versus mistakes can help me learn. It's both a mindset, but also like we have to speak it into our kids first. Do you have other recommendations for specific language parents should use to help support executive function, development, I guess we need to say, right? Because it's
Yes,
always developing to help to support that development in their kids.
yeah, development's a great word to use. Some words that I really like to use are plan. So what's your plan?
Mm,
What will you need to get ready? When is always a good question. When will you get started? When we think about times, we might ask our child to clean his room. And you just, clean your room, and then you find yourself, or I'll put myself in the penalty box. I find myself asking the same question 3 or 4 times. If I put a deadline on it, I need the room cleaned before noon. I wouldn't have to keep going back. Okay, did you clean your room? Did you clean your room? Right? So giving a deadline can help somebody with executive function. And I really like that question. When you see yourself getting ready for, and you can fill in the blank. So whether it's homework, going to school, going to soccer practice, what picture do you see in your mind? And then you can start, like, they might say, let's just take soccer practice. They might say, well, I'll bring a snack, I'll bring my cleats, I'll bring my uniform, but maybe they just say a ball. That's a start. And then you might say, okay, what else might you need? Sometimes I would start at the head and then just have them kind of go down their whole body, to think about what are the pieces that they would need, or the parts they would need to bring. So getting them thinking and asking more questions, cueing them about the materials, where they're going to work, who they're going to work with or play with, even who they can ask for help. Like, let's say they're doing homework and they get stuck. And then who or where did they put the work after they're done? This is a biggie.
Ooh.
I have worked with a lot of kids who actually do the work. They got through that hard part, and then they left it on their desk, or they left it on the
Yes.
coffee table.
Yep.
So that is an important step. When you're done, where does it go? So that, so we want to make sure it gets back to school. So those kinds of questions about the plan, at the get ready stage, while you're doing it, and after you're done, those are good things that kind of prime the brain.
This all strikes me as both so simple and so difficult, because as parents, when we are going a million miles an hour, what do we say? Say, put your homework in your cubby. We say, get your ball, your water bottle, your cleats, and your pads, right? Like, I have a kid in soccer. I have a kid who always forgets to put his homework in the right place. And just to say, where should your homework go, right? Instead of put
Yes.
it here. But it's a definite shift and takes our own heightened executive functioning skills, right? To now we have to think through, okay, parent out there, what do you visualize when your child is, doing something? Visualize yourself asking questions. You know what I mean? Like, we really do have to plan this out.
Yeah. And it will take a little longer to do that versus just go get, your backpack, go get your lunch, whatever it
Mhm.
is you're asking. You're kind of just sending out some commands, but you will find yourself doing that most every day versus helping your kids build a skill. So, and some days, you might be in a rush. Like I mentioned, time management is probably one of my biggest weaknesses. And I would be in a rush a lot. Be like, come on, hurry, hurry, let's go. And that is actually going to make things worse. Kids with weak executive function will probably not do so great, when there's that kind of chaos.
Mm.
So that, yeah, just a recommendation is to slow the game down a bit and start asking those questions, and you will really reap the benefit in time.
It is such an investment. And again, I think the community at Kids Cook Real Food, we get that. We get that more than others, because we are trying to teach our kids to cook instead of just cooking for them. We're training them to make their own lunches or clean their own bathrooms, which does take longer on the front. But many of us have also seen that ROI, that return on investment, on
Yes.
the end. And it's exactly the same. Like, basically, executive functioning is just functioning in life, right? It is being able to do the skills of life at a higher and higher level as you add years to your, add birthdays to your lives. And it's definitely what parents want for our kids. We don't want to be chasing them down when they're 20 with, where's your term paper? Have you turned in your essay? Like, that's ridiculous to think about. But that
Right.
starts when they're 7 and they have their second grade homework and they're losing it.
Absolutely.
Goodness. So speaking of cooking, let's connect executive functioning skills to the kitchen. Do you feel like our kids need to have well-developed executive functioning for cooking skills, and or can we help develop executive functioning in the kitchen?
I think it is a phenomenal place to build executive function.
Me
Phenomenal.
too.
It is absolutely a great environment. Um, think about it. Just with anything in life, it starts with you have a goal. So let's say in cooking, maybe your goal is to bake a cake, right? So you know that that's what you're looking for. Kids with executive function benefit from seeing a finished product before they start. So if they have a picture of a cake, doesn't have to be a real cake in front of them, could be, but something like, okay, that's what I'm trying to do. That really helps them, whether it's a homework assignment or cleaning their room. Like, saying clean my room to my kids, my idea of a clean room in there is totally different. So I
Oh,
need to show a picture of what a clean room looks like in my opinion. So, but back to the kitchen, think about you have a goal. You have to think about what will I need to get ready, right? So you might have to look at the ingredients of the recipe. You might need to go out shopping. You might need some special cooking tools. If anybody's ever started a recipe and it's 3 o'clock in the afternoon and you want this ready for your guests who are arriving at 6, and you realize, oh, this dough has to freeze overnight or be right? So reading through that recipe and planning it out and the time involved, that's really important executive function skills. And then at that during process, what do I do during the actual making of whatever it is? Let's just say a cake. I'm following steps. I have to be mindful of my timing. Do I beat that, the batter for 5 minutes? Oh, it's 15 minutes. Okay, that might not come out so well. So that timing is big, and sequencing the steps is really a great executive function skill. And then what will you do after? You want to obviously enjoy what you made, and there's going to be a cleanup involved, right? So you may have like some images of what that cleanup is going to look like. And then you may reflect on, okay, did something at this throughout this recipe not go so well? Would I do something different next time? Would I make a change or adapt? So the kitchen is just a spectacular place to practice these skills.
yeah, both practice and application. Because when done
Yes.
well, things go well.
Yes. And another point to just add is it's easier to turn on our executive function when it's something we enjoy. So if I like baking, which I really, really do, it's easier for me to turn on my executive function. Um, Sending out bills, one of my least favorite. So I might put that off. It's harder for me to turn my executive function on for that. And it's the same for kids. So for some kids who like baking, they may turn it on and you might say, like, wow, why can't they do that with math? They seem to like it here. They seem pretty organized in this environment. But if it's something they don't have as much of an interest in, it can be harder. But it's great to practice with something that you like and then try to transfer those skills to something that you're not quite as interested in.
That all makes a lot of sense. Now, you and I have both confessed in the course of this interview that we have some executive functioning skills we are both people over 30. So technically our brain should be fully developed. Man, do you have any tips for people who feel they have particular weaknesses, right? Like literally 2 days ago, I had a roast planned. I even knew, I think 2 days in advance, I had it planned. So that was good executive functioning skills. I knew what recipe I was going to use. I just didn't look at the recipe to remember that it was going to take almost 2 hours in the Instant Pot. And so when I got into the kitchen at 4 for a 5:45 meal, because my kids had, an event to go to, I was like, oh man, I did it again. And it's not like I haven't learned that one from failure before. Like, what in the world? Do you have any tips? And this is, again, for us as parents too, but for kids too, if you feel like there's just a particular weakness, are there specific strategies to use for those really weak areas?
Yeah. Um, so first, keep in mind brains are built, they're not born.
Okay.
And so even at our age, we're going to make mistakes at times. And sometimes I find I make my most mistakes when I'm too busy, if I'm going a little too fast. So I try to pump the brakes, try not to work at warp speed. And I would say cueing parents to help, well, encouraging parents to cue their kids, or for teachers to cue kids, um, instead of telling them what to do, cue them how to do, so that they can really get more of the thinking. Kids get more practice with the thinking and the planning, because we really want to shift that locus of control from telling to asking, so that they really start to develop the skills. So, kind of back to what we were saying earlier, I think those are some really important takeaways. But yes, like, um, 30 is the number that we're seeing more. And for kids who have um, some executive function challenges, they can be a little bit behind
Mm,
emotional maturity as well, right? So
okay.
you might have somebody who's 25, but's really kind of presenting more like a 20-year-old.
Mm. Or,
So we want to
yeah.
really help them build these skills. As you said, these are life skills. They're going to need them in every aspect of life.
Yes,
And
very, very.
yeah, when parents are feeling they're being helpful, I want them to encourage themselves, especially as kids get older, to fire yourself as a manager, hire yourself as a consultant. It's not my line. I believe I learned that from Ned Johnson, who wrote a great book called The Self-Driven Child. And that's just something I have to kind of always give myself a little check. Am I managing here or am I consulting? Right? Because we want to make sure kids are getting that practice with the skill building and the
Yeah. Oh,
thinking.
that's so good. Is there, so we've talked about a lot and a lot of different strategies. I love to leave parents with that one super practical step. Like if you told a mom or a dad, what's one thing you can do today, what would that one thing be?
I'd go back to that question. Ask, when you picture yourself starting and then they fill in that blank, what do you see yourself? What does that look like? What picture do you see? And then just, take it from there, as helping that child build um, a picture in their mind of what the beginning would look like, what the middle looks like, and what the end would look like.
Nice. I'm totally using that today with my second grader who tends to forget what he's doing halfway through his task. And, absolutely, he'll get the homework done and he'll leave it on the peninsula. That's just so good. And so for us parents, right, like here's your executive functioning practice. Pick the child, pick the situation. What do you see? Where are you when you see them next? Because I think that helps hook our brains just to remember to do it. Don't you? Like that visualization.
Yes, and you might set some timers,
Yeah.
that kind of cue that it's time to start a certain task. And what I have found really helpful too is to take some pictures of your child. So let's just take homework. And so what did they do? What do they need to get ready? So maybe you have a picture of them getting the materials, whether it's a book, writing instrument, paper, laptop. You have a picture of those items, and then you ask them to match the picture. And that's a skill that I learned from a great resource, Sarah Ward. And then you could have it at the during stage. What does it look like when we're doing our homework? We want them to maybe look focused. We want them to ask a question if they need to. And then what does it look like at the end? So we were saying earlier how some kids, right? So we wanted to go back. Sometimes a teacher has a system like a homework folder. We wanted to go back in the homework folder so I'd have a picture of that step. But then there's another step. It needs to get back into the backpack. So another picture of the child putting the folder into the backpack. And you place that in a prominent spot where they're going to do their homework. And then you can cue them to match the picture. So
Nice.
instead of, the parent doing all the talking, you need to go do this, and this. Kids with executive function have a hard time holding on to multiple steps all at once. Take it one step at a time and ask them to match the picture of step one.
Mm,
Once
nice.
they have that, match the picture of step two. And then once they have that, match the picture of step three. And that breaks it down, reduces the cognitive overload, and they're building the skill. They can see themselves doing it, and that can be really helpful.
And I can see that strategy. Like, I feel like that one does have an age limit expiration. Like, I wouldn't do that with a 16-year-old. I don't think. But it all, has to be for those repetitive tasks that happen over and over. And so then for tasks that are one-offs that happen very irregularly, you just have to get this thing done. Hopefully, I think what I hear you say is that when you build your executive functioning habits with the repetitive tasks like homework, morning routine, after school routine, right? Those things that just happen day in and day out, that's going to improve your executive function, your planning and organizing, and your chances of succeeding at the one-off task, like my son who needs to sell his car, taking up space in the road, and the police finally got called because it was such an eyesore.
Yeah.
That's probably a little motivating to kids too.
And I would say as kids get older, they're going to have more long-term tasks, and helping them with those long-term tasks. Because if they have weak executive function with time management, they may leave it to the last minute, they may procrastinate,
Mhm.
or they may not even know how to get started. Maybe they don't have a picture in mind of what each step looks like.
Okay.
So the visuals are really helpful, even with the brain loves visuals. So any age, I mean, one of my favorite things to do is just look at cookbooks and look at the ones that have pictures of the meal, because I get to see a finished product. And I'm like, oh, yes, I want to go there. Right.
Does
So,
text count as a visual? Like if you were helping a teenager with a more long-term project, obviously breaking it into chunks
mhm.
and putting a deadline for each of those chunks is one major executive functioning skill. So does just like making a list or putting items on a calendar, is that visual or does that not count because it's not imagery?
Though that can count when you have a picture next to it, that's even
Mm.
better.
Okay.
For a child that needs to see what a critical essay looks like, or, what a resume looks like, you need that visual. So the visuals can be really super helpful. Charts can be really helpful. That could be, or a web, some kind of graphic organizer. Um,
Okay.
Obviously calendars, those are visual as well.
All right. So bottom line is just practice, practice, practice. Ask the questions instead of telling the tells, right? Instead of giving directions.
Yes. Start asking them, and really using those words. What's your plan? Tell me about your plan.
I like it. I like it. It's simple but difficult, but doable and definitely worthwhile to help our kids build and develop their executive functioning skills as best they can, right? Whether they have weaknesses, challenges, or are just growing and developing kids, right? That we all need to
Absolutely.
build these things, or adults, says Katie, the time
Absolutely.
challenged
I'm
mom.
still learning. And the brain continues to grow and learn based on how we use it throughout life.
That is good to remember. So we don't have to be married to our weaknesses, right? Like that is a total cop out to say, oh, like I'm time challenged, I'm not going to work on that anymore. We can all continue learning even in our older years.
Absolutely. I have one student that I work with who's 65. And
Oh,
she was growing up in a time where this really wasn't talked about, and incredibly bright, but had a hard time putting it all together, and is now finally really realizing her potential.
no way. Okay, that is the perfect inspiring note to leave on. Whether your kid is 6 or you are 65, you can make progress and build your executive functioning skills. Thank you so much, Noelle, for being here today. This was great.
Oh, it was so much fun. Thanks for having me, Katie.
And listeners, I will be back next week with another expert to help you get the information you need to really raise those healthy, independent adults and be an intentional parent at the end of the day. See you next week.